Yo, what is up, Redheads? This is Jason Henry, the Redhead Henry, and today we are going to be setting up our background scene environment sprites inside of After Effects. This is going to be a two-part video, as I'm going to be showing you two different ways really that you can set up your scenes with background sprites. It should be noted too that if you view my past tutorials on setting up scenes and backgrounds, while that way is kind of outdated and old, it is still an alternative method to setting up your scene, but everything that I'm going to be showing you from this point going forward will be working inside of 3D space and how to work inside 3D space inside of After Effects. And for this first tutorial, we're going to keep it simple, start off with some basic introductory methods for setting up a camera, placing background sprites, and in that next tutorial it will be slightly more advanced, and in that tutorial I'll be showing you how to create a full 360-degree environment inside of After Effects. So let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and import in all of the background asset sprites that I'm going to be needing for this tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control I, which is Control Import, and you'll see that I've got some just real basic sprites here that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to import in all of these guys. If you hold down Shift and select, you can select all the sprites that you want to import. So hit Import there. And now, boom, they've all popped in over here into our project bin. Next, I am going to create a new folder, and we're just going to call this folder Sprites. So if you click this little folder icon down here, that creates a Sprites folder. And basically, we're just going to select all of these sprites that we imported in. I'm holding down Shift to select them, and we're just going to drag them right into our Sprites folder. Perfect, keeping things all organized. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control N. Now what that does is that's going to allow us to set up a brand new composition that we're going to be working with. And actually, if I close out of this, if you guys come up to Composition, New Composition, that is the exact same way of setting up a new comp. So either Control N or Composition, New Composition. So I'm going to call this one Main Comp. And we want this to be 1920 by 1080. This is your standard 1080p dimensions, so 1920 by 1080 there. We want square pixels with a frame rate of 30, and the duration, I'm just going to leave it as a minute. So your settings for your composition should look something like this, and I'm just going to say OK to that. So now we have our new comp, and it is looking great. So the very first thing I'm going to do before we start plopping in all of our sprites is I'm going to create a new camera, and what we're going to do is this camera is going to be parented to a null object. So we're going to be using the camera and the null object to control how our camera moves and operates inside of this composition. So if you guys want to come up here, you can go to Layer, New, Camera, and then you should be presented with a window that looks like this. I'm going to call this camera Main Cam. And your settings should look something like this. I'm not really too concerned about this at this time. You guys won't have to worry about adjusting any of this. By default, it should look something like this. You can change this to a 1-camera node or 2-camera node. For the purposes of this tutorial, don't worry about it. Your settings should look something like this. I'm just going to say OK. Boom, there's our new camera. Next, we're going to go up to Layer, New, and then we're also going to do, like I mentioned before, a new null object. So now we have our null object in here. And to try and keep things somewhat clean down in our main timeline, I'm going to make our null and our main camera the same color. So if you shift and click on both of these layers and come over here to these little colored icons, you can change the colors of these layers. So I'm just going to choose yellow, so then I know that when I see these yellow layers visually, just at a quick glance, that I know those are controlling my camera. You guys can choose whatever color you want, it really doesn't matter. Next, I'm going to come over here to my sprites, and I'm going to take, let's see what we can start with here, guys. We're going to start with the ground first, and I've got this grass layer here. So if you drag that down into your timeline, you should have something that looks like this once you get your ground in there. Now, when working inside of 3D space, and the way that we're going to set this up, the way you want to place or have your sprites designed is that you're looking at it from a bird's eye view. So in this case, I have some grass, and if I hit S on this grass layer and scale it up, you guys will see that this is just a normal grass looking sprite ground layer here. So let's undo that, Control Z, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this little 3D box icon right here. So now this grass layer is 3D. Now before we go any further, I want to preface that this main cam should be parented to this null object. So if you toggle this little parent and link icon right here, this little swirly little icon, if you click that, you can parent your cam to this null object. So now what that means is I can show you guys here. If you hit P on this null object, that brings up the position attributes. Now you can start moving around this null object, and it's actually moving this grass layer without us actually having to move the grass layer. And that is exactly what we want. We want our camera to control this entire scene without having to touch any of our background sprites. That is exactly what our objective here is, guys. So I'm going to undo that and make sure that our main cam is still parented to our null object. And then what I'm going to do with this background ground grass layer here is I'm going to toggle down this transformation properties, and we're going to come over here to X rotation, and we're going to set this to 90. So what that does is it completely flips our background sprite here, our ground sprite, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and do 90 for that, and we're just going to bring it down somewhat here, and we're also going to scale this up, and I'm going to say maybe around like 500 or so, and you guys will have to play around with your settings and whatnot to get it to look how you want. But the idea here is that you're not touching anything with your camera just yet. You want to leave your camera exactly as is. You only want to parent your main cam to the null object. That is the only thing you should have done with these two layers here. So scaling up our grass layer, and let's go ahead and check this little icon here. This is our draft quality. So when you zoom in, you should see it should look all pixelated. The reason that I do that is because you want to see that pixelation. You want to see that kind of textured type of look. If you just leave it on default, it looks kind of blurry. To me, that just doesn't look right. Again, it's totally up to you guys how you want to do it, personal preference. Okay, so we've got that. Let's scale this up a little bit more here. That's good. So our grass layer is in place. If we come here to our null object, we can actually rename this null object, and we'll name it cam control. Okay, so now that we have our grass in place, we're going to plop in a sky. So I'm going to come over here. We've got a couple different skies. We'll use this one here, and we're going to plop this sky layer directly behind our grass layer, make it a 3D object, and that is looking pretty good. So now I want to come over here to our view options. So if you click on view and do two views horizontal, now you are presented with two different screens here. On the right, we have our active main camera screen where you can see our composition. And then over here on the left, we are viewing this same composition from a bird's eye view. So now we can start messing around inside of Z-Space just to try to get an idea of where we are placing things. So you can see here that when I click on this grass layer, this box right here is actually that grass layer. So when you click on that sky, the background, you can see that we have it right here. So I can actually take this background, and if you hover over the little anchor point, you should be presented with different options. You have the blue for Z-Space, the X is red, and the Y is yellow. So if you grab onto the blue and push it back, you'll notice now we are pushing back that sky inside of Z-Space. So that's exactly what I want to do. You can do it over here as well. I personally like to see it from both angles, from top and from the side view here. So I'm just zooming in and out by using the little scrolly wheel on my on my mouse. So we're going to push this back and we're going to scale it up. Now I should preface something here, guys. You're going to have to do a lot of work with your background sprites before you import them into After Effects. I have always said that you should try and minimize the amount of work that you do inside of After Effects as much as possible. So make sure that you are, color correcting, getting rid of transparency, all of that kind of stuff beforehand, before getting it inside of After Effects. It just saves you time in the long run. Okay, so now I've got this cloudy background sky back here. We're going to move it up just slightly. And we'll scale it up too a little bit here. That's good. And we'll get rid of this. We'll go back to our normal default view. And I just want you guys to see how this is working here. If we start panning the camera from right to left, you'll see that this whole layer, the grass layer as it moves with the camera, that sky in the background, it's kind of like this parallax type of effect. So I'm going to show you guys too how this looks once you start placing in different objects. So I have a tree sprite right here. I'm going to plop that in there. We'll make it 3D as well. Hold on, we'll undo all that. Get us back to our 960 by 540. Plop the tree in there. And we will scale this up, make it 3D. And I did leave the pink background in here on purpose to show you guys how to do the color keying. If you go over here to your effects and presets and just type in key, click on that color key, it plops the color key. As long as you have that tree layer selected, if you double click on color key, it will plop the color key on that layer. Take that little dropper icon, click on that pink background, and boom, it just keys out your background there. So now if we click on position, we can move this guy forward. We'll move him down actually a little bit just to get him into the ground. There we go. So now this tree is plopped inside the ground. And if we start moving our camera, we've got this nice 3D looking effect here where you can see the background behind the tree as the camera moves, going up and down as well. So this is looking good. Let's undo all that. Now obviously these sprites aren't the best sprites in the world. In fact, this environment that we're setting up here isn't going to be the greatest looking environment, but I'll leave that to you guys to come up with your own environments and using your own sprites. So let's continue here. We're going to plop in some mountains. We've got some of those, so I'll plop those right here. Check that little icon, same thing, 3D space. And we've actually got two mountains here. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I left these two mountains in here to show you guys how to mask out objects for a layer. So I'm just going to scale this up just so you guys can see. Just hitting S on my keyboard with that layer selected gets me the scaling options. That's how I scale up and down. And I'm simply going to come up here to this rectangle tool and just simply draw a rectangle and mask out that mountain. So now we can move this mountain inside 3D space. Let's put it somewhere in the background here. That's good. And if I wanted to duplicate this mountain as well, with that layer selected, just hit Control D, duplicates the layer. Now you have another mountain. So we can push that in the background back there. I'm just going to keep hitting Control D. Just get a bunch of mountains going. That one's back there. Do another Control D. Bring this one forward. Notice how I have that layer selected and I'm just controlling the point of origin and Z space by clicking on, again, that little blue arrow, bringing it forwards and back. So we'll plop this one over here. And let's throw a couple more trees in there. We've got this tree layer selected. Control D. We'll move this one back. Control D. Move that one back. Maybe plop that over there. Another Control D. And if you hold onto the layer as I'm moving it, I'm holding down Shift, which gets you a nice dragging left and right type of movement there. If you don't hold down Shift, then you're kind of like wobbly all over the place. So holding down Shift as I'm moving these. Whoops. That's good. We'll move this back. So if you wanted this mountain obviously to look bigger, now as I'm moving it here, you'll notice that now this mountain is in front of this tree, but maybe I don't want the size of this mountain to really look that small in comparison to this tree. So I'm just going to scale up the mountain with this layer selected, hit S. I'm just going to scale it up. Hold down shift. Let's kind of move this around here. So maybe now it's kind of positioned off over here, something like that. Let's get another mountain in here. So this is starting to look somewhat decent with all these different elements in here, all this clutter with the trees and the mountains. So you guys get the general idea with this. I also have another layer here. Let's see what we've got. We've got this other background layer, and if I come all the way down to the bottom of my timeline, we're going to plop this just above the sky level. And we will also make this 3D, and we will scale it up. So now there's something in the background there. Color key out that background. Beautiful. And we're just going to push this back inside a Z space. Let's go back to our 2 views horizontal. And we will plop this behind everything except for the sky. And we'll scale it up. Go back to our 1 view here. So now we've got something going on in the background. So notice how everything is working with these different layers in different positions inside of Z space. So as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sky layer and I'm going to push it back even further. That looks good. Let's scale it up some, just to get it a little more back in the distance. Beautiful. There really is no right or wrong here. It's just setting up the scene how you want to get it. Whatever it is you're trying to achieve in terms of the look of your scene. Okay, so this is looking halfway decent. Let me show you guys how you're controlling this scene. So if I hit P on my keyboard, that brings up the position properties for my camera controller. And as I slide from right to left, you'll notice, wow, we've got a lot of depth going on. A lot of different layers that are giving that illusion of depth inside of your scene, which looks really, really nice. And actually, as I was scrolling here, I noticed that that background sprite with these mountains, we can actually push that back just a little bit more to give off that illusion that they are really far back in the distance. So if I zoom out here, you'll notice here's my sky, here are those mountains, here is the grass and all of those other little elements there. We'll go back to 1 view and let's scale up that background. Or those mountains. There we go. So our scene is looking pretty good here, you guys. You'll notice if I come up to our camera controls, if I hit P, I can start messing around with the position of our environment, moving up and down inside of it, which is great. Now if you want to move inside Z space in terms of going forwards and backwards as if the camera is moving closer to the tree, if you click on your camera here, toggle down into our transform options, we have a couple of different options and things we can do here. Now there are other ways you can set up your camera and whatnot, but personally this is for me how I like to do it. So what you can do is there's 2 things. I'll show you the first one. The first is if you come up to your cam control and then you click on 3D, that's going to give you that Z index, and now you can start moving forwards and backwards inside of your 3D space here. So that is one way to do it. Another way to do it is if you decide not to have that checked for making it 3D, and if you come down here to your main cam, you can also do it over here with your position property as well. Personally, I like to have this checked and then just moving it this way, but there are times when I won't have this checked and I'll start messing around with different positions and whatnot, which we will get into the next tutorial with rotation. How you can get rotation to work. In fact, right now you'll notice as I'm rotating the camera in 360 degrees, everything else that is not set up for our environment does not give us that full 360 degree look. So obviously this is just a starting point for this. I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful. This is all I really wanted to cover today for getting this set up. The very last thing that I will mention to you guys is that if your layer or your timeline starts to get really cluttered, what you can do is you can select all of your background layers by holding down Shift, and if you right click on this and then do pre-compose, that's going to pre-compose all of these layers into a single layer. So we're going to call this new layer BG for background. Move all attributes into a new composition and adjust the composition duration time span. Yes, say OK to that. So now it moved everything into a single layer. But before we continue, it is very important that this little star icon right here, make sure you click this little empty area. Boom. What that means is that it's just inheriting the camera settings from our layer here. You can double click on this new comp which we just created, which now contains all of our background sprites. But if you come back to our main comp, you'll notice that we are still able to move our camera around inside this environment. And that is exactly what we want. So I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful in setting up your sprites and backgrounds inside of 3D Space. Again, this is just the first part of a two-part video. In the next video, we'll get a little more in-depth and detailed with how to set up a full 360-degree environment, working with rotation and the placing of sprites inside of your environment as well. And then in other tutorials, obviously, we will be progressing to the actual animation parts, putting in effects, all of that good stuff. So make sure you guys are subscribed if you are new here and find value in this content. Give it a like, give a notification bell, turn that sucker on for future tutorials and videos. That is going to be it from me, guys. Have a good one.